had a Honda dealer reach out to me, and I won't say the store because I don't want to get the guy in trouble. But he reached out and he said, "Hey man," he's like, "You think you can talk about some of this stuff?" He's like, "Because I'm trying to." He's like, "I want to talk to my dealer about it, but I'm afraid that if I do, he's going to, either get upset with me or maybe even fire me." He said, "So, he said, could you guys talk about it?" And I said, "Man, that's a great opportunity to really talk about communication." So think about it like this: you've got a general sales manager in a very strong Honda store who is fearful of talking to his owner about things he wants to communicate with him because he's afraid of the backlash. So he can't even communicate effectively to the guy he works for, and the guy's entrusted him in running his store. And he can't even effectively communicate with him because he's worried about what's going to happen. So I thought if that's happening in that store, it's got to be happening in the stores all over. So I thought, let's talk about effective communication and three categories: training, management interaction, and actually working, desking, and closing car deals. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a lot to fit in, but we'll just go through it. So I'm going to start with the first one I talked about was communication and training. And this may upset a few dealers even watching this show today, but I'm going to say some things that, or talk about some things that I experienced in my automotive career that were frustrating and that really led to poor employee satisfaction. And that without employee satisfaction, you're not going to have good customer satisfaction. So, and then, like I said, going back to that, when I was with Cardone, there was a JD Power study came out, and it said that there's three reasons, the three things people hate most about buying a car. And the three things people hated most about buying a car were actually not price. They weren't payments. They weren't any of that stuff. The number one thing was time. It took too long to buy a car. Number two was they hated the process. They hated the process. And then number three was they didn't like their salesperson because they felt like they were lying to them. They were pushy. They didn't communicate well. And JD Power went out and did the same survey of people in automotive, and they had the same three complaints. What they hated most about selling a car was how long it took. The number two thing was the negotiating deal process, and number three was the customer. And that's pretty sad when the person hates the customer. That's their biggest complaint. But it's real because of some of the parameters put in the store they had to work under, and which made the process not effective because in the communication process, we were trying to get what we wanted as a dealership and not what was great for the customer, the salesperson, and the process of selling a car. And so sometimes we have to sacrifice control to really give the customer and our employees and our team a better experience. So does that make sense?
It makes total sense, man. And normally I would ask a lot of questions, but I'm just going to let you take over because.
All right. Well, all right. So here's a little story. I was the F&I manager for a big dealer group. And this would have been about 12 years ago. And we came into the store, and they brought in the CFO had brought in a training company like your it would be like your insurance provider, that your reinsurance provider for the store. They brought in some attorneys and some training, and they brought every manager, every finance manager, every sales manager, GSM, general manager. They put us through a mandatory training class. And in this, it was a 2-day, 8-hour training class. And in that 2-day, 8-hour training class, we went through a lot of different scenarios. We talked about recon of vehicles. So, there was a lady who bought a truck, and the car went through PDI or UCI. It's a used truck, and it needed 2 tires to pass UCI, to pass North Carolina State inspection. Well, what we had always done, and years of automotive, was put the 2 new tires on the front of the car and move the 2 goblins to the back. That protocol had changed, and you're supposed to put the 2 new tires on the back now and leave the front as is if you were only going to replace 2 tires. Well, this lady bought this truck, and it was done that way. And she was pulling a horse trailer, and she was in the rain. And because the tires had different tread depths, front and back, when she hydroplaned and she wrecked her vehicle, she was able to sue the dealership. And the first 2 people that got fired was the service manager and the used car manager, because they didn't follow the right process of PDI, and they didn't know where those tires should have been at. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything. It was just a frivolous lawsuit of someone not paying attention, driving in the rain, that went back and sued the car dealership. And a second thing we learned in that class was just going around all the things about how to sell a car. You know, what income levels were acceptable, what job terms, how a credit app had to be done, everything you could think of to sell a car. So when we walked out of that class, they made us sign a form saying, basically, hey, if we get sued for any of this, it's going to be your fault because you were the manager on duty, you did it, and you sold the car. But you need to sign this. So when we left that meeting, all the general managers, finance managers, we had all went to lunch, and we were talking. And basically, what we all felt like at the store level was, man, if we followed every rule in this giant, they gave us this big book. If we followed every rule in that book, we really could not sell a car. I mean, there's no way that we could follow every rule in that book and sell the level, at least the level of cars we were selling in a store that was selling 100 cars. If we followed every rule to the T, every recon to the T, we probably could sell 40 to 50 cars, almost half the production. And so what do you think would happen if we followed those rules exactly and we only sold half the cars? What would happen to all of us that work there?
You're going to get fired.
We're going to get fired. So if we follow the rules exactly to keep the dealer clear and clean and free of any potential liabilities, we're all going to lose our jobs. But if we do what we know how to do to put deals together and sell cars, and something happens, we're going to be the ones responsible, get fired, or even, you know, get prosecuted for it, you know, for what happened. And that was that created a lot of just animosity towards the ownership group and that entire dealer group, because we all felt like we were just hung out to dry. We felt like it's all our fault. They know as an ownership group that we're not going to follow all these rules because we want to keep our jobs and we need to make money and provide for our families. But we also knew that they didn't really have our back. You know, they were putting us out there because they knew they could hang us out because we signed these forms. They knew that we would take responsibility. They would be clear, and they would still make money because they knew we would operate as normal to sell cars.